لله العالمين بشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري لساني يفقهوا قولي يا رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. So we are here one more time to hopefully not requiring too much time on the first 2 or 3 things, but I just wanted to go back to the beginnings and if we could, we all know this, that this is the raison d'etre of this program. And what does it mean to be honest, authentic, and true to the purpose of this program is to understand what is the definition of the Quranic worldview, because obviously there is no question about whether or not we need to discuss how this program was initiated, what is the board document, what is the raison d'etre of this, like how is it different from the next door or any other school. Fundamental to the understanding of the Quranic worldview is also the concept of two learners. We talked about applying the 10 principles, foundational principles, Mabadi Ashra, last time. I'll go into that. But I think one of the most important aspects of the concentric circles, as well as this whole initiative, has been that our Prophet has taught us to be the learners from cradle to grave. This is one of the foundational aspects of the concept of learning in Islam, meaning we are never done until the last breath. We are always in a state of learning, we are always in a state of, our deeds are not finished, our learning is not finished, whether it's experiential learning, whether it's academic learning, any kind of learning. So the idea that there is a teacher and a student is very foreign to Islam. There are two students in any given situation, whether it's in a school, in a madrasa, at home, anywhere. This is something so fundamental, so basic that it is often overlooked in an educational setup. Because in an education setup, the parents, the students, the whole system expects teachers to be teaching, not learning. Is that a tough one?
No, not at all.
Very good, very good. So, if that's the case, that means there is no problem in remaining in the state of learning always, for myself, for teachers, for everyone. As for it's basic. This I'm emphasizing because this program has a history of 12 years now in this particular situation, 3 years before that. So people who have been in this situation for so long have definitely established some kind of working habits. And those working habits have structures, and those structures need to be relooked in the light of this basic Quranic prophetic teaching that we are never done learning, meaning year after year, if we are just opening the same box and coming to the classroom with the same thing, then we are not learning. We are just repeating ourselves year after year. This may be theoretically acceptable to many, but it's very hard to change, including myself. I do the same thing every single day in terms of my habits, but with the consciousness that we have to be in an ever receptive state of updating ourselves. And I just learned something so difficult yesterday. You know, things happen to us like what happened last week. So life is not static, our experiences are not static. We are in a constant state of change. So unless we also change, there are big issues with that. So two learners can so constant reflection. Then we want to go to the principles now. This is where we were last time. I mentioned last time the need for these Mabadi Ashra, the 10 foundational principles, arose in a historical context. And that is the case with everything in every civilization. Human beings, we are part of that situation. Human beings react to changing situations. Like we become old, we change our habits. We were children once. Civilizations are likewise. And I mentioned that these principles emerged in the Islamic civilization in the wake of tremendous amount of camel loads of knowledge coming from the Greek civilization, translated into Arabic, and creating a fundamental rift with the foundational structure of Islam until that time. Meaning, there was a crucible, there was an enclosed area, there was Medina, there was Mecca, there was 23 years of more or less an isolated situation, isolated within the environs of the Arabian Peninsula. There were connections with the Roman civilization to some extent by trade and etc. But there was no intellectual influx. There was no Aristotle coming to say, well, I think the word has always been, what are you saying? The word came into existence at a certain time and it's going to disappear? No, the word has always been in existence and it will always remain in existence. And these were not small things that came, and they came with such speed, it's like teenagers. They just, hormones just, so it took 3 centuries to settle. It was such a huge influx of foreign ideas. And early on, Ibn Furak, he is credited to be the author of this work, initial work, but there are many works which came in the wake of this. The principles were established on the basis of the teaching of the Qur'an, and they said, okay, we have tremendous amount of learning to do, and each branch of learning has its own demands. And one of the foundational aspects of the education system that developed was that everything that we learn has to be under the umbrella. That umbrella was based on the 3 Qur'anic principles that I mentioned last time: the oneness of God, the necessity of guidance from outside the human domain, that is the prophethood. Human intellect itself wasn't enough to guide itself, to guide human beings. And this we also know from systems science. Any system, any functional system cannot guide itself. Somebody else, something else from a higher plane has to guide that system. We can have the hardware, it won't run by itself. We can make the cars, but they won't run by themselves. There has to be guidance from outside the human domain in order to teach what can be learned given the limitations that human beings have. We have resources to learn, but this is the suprastructure that is needed. So they said every branch of learning has to be within this big tent, meaning there is a metaphysical principle that organizes knowledge under this umbrella. And this was, at that time, in every civilization. It was only in the modern Western civilization that they said, no, we cannot have metaphysics controlling physics. or chemistry or biology. That's just that kind of policing. That's being a policeman. How would a philosopher, a mathematician would be able to regulate physics or biology or chemistry? These subjects have to be independent. I'll come to that later. But within the framework of learning in Islamic civilization, this metaphysical structure, the umbrella, said that these 10 principles are applicable to every branch of science, including education itself. So education is ta'lim and tarbiyah, and they combine the learning with the making of the human being as well. So when we are learning mathematics or chemistry or physics, we are simultaneously learning how to be what God wants us to be, what the teachings of Islam, or for that matter any other civilization that is under the same metaphysical structure would want us to be. The second most important aspect of this whole structure is that Islamic civilization was, it still is to whatever extent it remains, guided by the revelation. So the kinetic force of that civilization, the kinetic force means the force that moves things, is the revelation itself, as opposed to the human thought. So that meant there has to be definitions, and these definitions have to be accepted before we can do anything. What is the definition of any given branch of knowledge? What is the definition of human beings? What is the definition of knowledge itself? What is knowledge? So they went into details, and these were questions which had been dealt with Aristotle and other philosophers before as well. But this particular reconstruction of these primary foundational principles through the lens of the Qur'an transformed many ideas, it retained certain ideas, and it rejected certain ideas which came into the Islamic civilization. And this was done at a time when there was no living Greek civilization. This is very important for historical understanding, that when all of this happened, there were no military forces, there were no occupiers, there was no economic blockade, there was nothing like that. It was a civilization that was rising, it was conquering other lands, people were going to other places, and huge amount of transformation was happening. And most of this knowledge, which is very fascinating for me, because I love this Mawra al-Nahr area, the beyond the river. The river was Oxus, like this is Central Asia. So all the way from Medina to Samarkand and Bukhara, both in Uzbekistan now, greatest scholars of Islam came from this region. Greatest scholars of Arabic language came from this, and they were not Arabs to start with. They were Persian, or they were speakers of other language. Greatest hadith collectors came from that. Imam Bukhari, Imam Muslim, they came from there. They arrived in Baghdad, they lived in Baghdad. Many of them lived there, but many didn't come to Baghdad, they lived elsewhere. So the definition of a given subject. What defines linguistically al-had is the boundary. Everything other than God has boundaries. So each branch of knowledge has a boundary. And this is so important for us to know, because, as I said last time, if we want a gold earring and we go to the blacksmith, we'll never get a gold earring. In order to ask the questions from the domain of knowledge where these answers are available. We don't ask, for example, we don't ask science, what is the purpose of life? We don't go to biology to say, what is the definition of male and female? We don't go to the wrong place with the questions that we have. We have to first know what is the boundary of this branch of knowledge. Second, each branch of knowledge, everything has a name. One of the first things in the Qur'an, when the narration about the creation of the human being is mentioned, is Allamaul Bayan, Khalaqa Insan Allamaul Bayan. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught human beings bayan, the speech. Speech cannot happen without the names. So name is an extremely important Qur'anic concept. Like we respect names, we need to respect names. And names also tell us something about the essence of things. Inner essence of things is built into the name. So what is the name of this branch of knowledge, and what does it deal with? Number 3. What is the benefit of learning it? Now, what are the specific questions? Issues is perhaps not a very good translation of Masail because it's very literal, but what are the genuine questions within this branch of knowledge? So we, in grade 6, for example, we need to teach properties of matter, for example. Which branch of knowledge deals with matter? We take the question of matter to, say, psychology, we may get some answers, but if we take it to physics or chemistry, that is the proper domain of these sciences. What are the sources of this particular branch of knowledge? They give the example of the sayings of the Prophet ﷺ, often in explaining the sources of this branch of knowledge of hadith. Who is the founder of this branch of knowledge? And number 8 is extremely important from the aspect of what I was saying before. Each branch of knowledge is related to another branch of knowledge. What is that relationship? And number 9 is the status. And this deals with the hierarchy of knowledge. I won't go into details of that, but there is hierarchy in everything. This Karl Marx said that we don't have hierarchies, we want to have equal status for everyone. That was so unnatural, the whole system collapsed. It's impossible. Everything is graded, everything has a hierarchy. What is the rank of this particular branch of knowledge? So that means certain branches of knowledge have more nobility, and that nobility is defined by what they deal with. A science that deals with God Himself, or His prophets, or His books, or the path to return to Him. That's at a different level than the science that deals with metals, for example. Each branch has its own. And finally, what is the legal ruling of learning this branch? I gave the example of astrology last time. Astronomy and astrology both study the objects in the sky. One is haram, is illegal, impermissible, the other is very noble. Objects are the same, everything is the same, but the ruling is different. And who gives this ruling? Not human beings. Again, this is the perfect example for understanding the metaphysical aspect of it, because there is nothing other than this metaphysical principle which would say astrology is not permissible. Because from a human perspective, like what difference does it make? If we are studying the alignment of the planets for determining the time of prayer or determining the fortunes of making a decision, like from human perspective, it will be the same. So these are foundational principles. They are very helpful in every educational system, but more so in this particular case because we advertise ourselves to be delivering the Alberta program of studies from the Qur'anic worldview. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a lot, but do you want to? I know you're recording. Do you want to continue and do
sure.
that, and then we can have a
Okay, we
next
can have
and
okay,
that
very
way it's not
sure,
pushed onto
good,
that.
very good.
And
Okay,
what's our
we
time
can
frame?
go to the next.
Our time frame until 3:37 right now. Yes.
Okay, I will go quickly because the main thing. We can go to the next then.
Sure.
Okay, so this is really the crux of the matter because theoretical frameworks are theoretical frameworks, but when it comes to applying them, then we are dealing with a real life situation. It's not theoretical anymore. We are dealing with human beings, we are dealing with a structure, we are dealing with a system, we are dealing with certain guiding principles within the system, which may or may not be the same as the principles I am talking about. So I wanted to actually see at this level of applicability, what does it mean to say that Skinner Circle delivers the Alberta program of studies from the Quranic worldview? Which means we first need to know what does it mean to say this is the Alberta program of learning. As far as I could see, Alberta program of learning means there are certain outcomes that Black Minder we printed. I sent you those 60 pages per subject. These are the outcomes. There are no textbooks anymore as they used to have. Okay, this is the textbook for chemistry for grade 6. We have a pool of resources. And when I ask teachers, so what do? You have this outcome. You are going to determine the apparent movement of the sun. This is the conceptual knowledge and this is the procedural knowledge. This is a standard unit. As I said last time, I'm very disturbed by putting icing on things and say now it has become kosher. That's not being honest. And just the icing itself becomes an extra effort. Somebody is cooking and somebody, in the process of baking something, the main focus of the work goes into baking, into finding the ingredients and doing it, and then you say, yes, icing is good, I'll add to it. But the person who has done the baking and say, well, now you tell me this has to be this kind of icing, that becomes extra work. So this approach is something that we need to reconsider. We need to go back to the actual ingredients and say, okay, how can we deliver this particular unit or any unit in science and all these subjects from the Quranic perspective? I would apply those principles to these smaller segments as well, and also for assessment, whether or not we are being honest. So this particular unit is what can shadows tell us about the apparent movement of the sun. And the conceptual knowledge is that due to the eastward rotation of Earth on its axis, the sun appears to rise in the east, move westward across the sky over the course of a day, and set in the west. Shadows can be used to record the changes in position of the sun in the sky. Shadow length changes when the angle of light changes. When we apply those principles to this conceptual framework, This is where the foundational work is. Is this conceptual framework, is this conceptual knowledge in harmony with the Quranic worldview? This is a given. This is just a random example I took from resources available. So this is the level where I think the teachers need to engage with those questions, the foundational questions. And then the second aspect is the procedural knowledge, constructing a device that plots the apparent movement of the sun, relating the position of the sun in the sky to angle of sunlight. They give us the knowledge, conceptual framework, and then they give us the procedural knowledge. What do we say in the foundational book of this program? We say there are three aspects. There is the space, there is the content, and then how the content is delivered. These are the three foundational aspects. With space, we talked about putting the things on the walls, etc. But the content and how that content is delivered. This is a framework that is there, and this framework has tremendous problems when we put the Quranic lens. For the teacher to have that lens and be able to see what the problems are is the first step. Once that is clear, apparent, received, understood, internalized, then it's just a matter of saying, okay, I see these problems and I'm going to teach the same unit, meet the same outcomes as required by APS, but from the Quranic perspective. It may look very daunting, but once you start applying the principles, it becomes like very, very clear. We start with questioning. Due to the eastward rotation of Earth on its axis, the sun appears to rise in the east, move westward across. What is due to is doing here? It's the rotation of the Earth that gives us this appearance of the sun rising from the east. We are dealing with very foundational concepts here. They go to the question of these objects in the visible sky, as seen from the modern scientific point of view, which is what we are teaching here, and as seen from the Quranic perspective. And the beauty of this whole thing is that once the foundational aspects are understood once, it's done for life. There is no further need to really keep going back to it. If the reality, if we could go further, if the reality of this there is a different file. There is a different file dealing with the there. This is the one. Thank you. So if you could just go back right here. This is a deconstruction of the procedure and the conceptual knowledge. We accept that Skinner circle is nature focused, historically rooted, and based on the Quranic worldview. So these are the points of the conceptual knowledge due to east rotation of the sun. The sun appears in that, right? The shadows length changes, the length of the shadow changes when the angle of light changes. If we go down a little bit, we actually have verses in the Qur'an directly dealing with this particular aspect of the movement of the sun and the shadows. This is the conceptual framework that any authentic transmission of this particular unit would give to the students in Skinner Circle, which would be fundamentally different from another school in the city or in the province. Is this scientific or not? Are these two opposing conceptual frameworks, or are they at different levels of conceptualization? So when I say if you put water on the burner, it's going to boil at 100 degrees, and if you put it in the freezer, it's going to freeze at 0 degrees. And there is an observational fact that can happen everywhere, whether I do it here in Edmonton or I do it in Makkah. Water is going to have the same properties. The conceptual difference between the Qur'anic worldview of looking at this particular property of the sun and the earth and the shadows is the fact that these objects are not autonomous. They are not independent of the will of the Creator. There are laws which have given us this conceptual framework, but these are lower level laws in the physical world, which it is the habit of Allah, is the habit of the Creator to let those laws operate. There is an ayah that tells us this is the sunnatullah, this is the custom of God, to let the laws that He has made, and there are no laws of nature. Nature doesn't have the ability to give laws itself. There are only divine laws. And those laws operate, but they operate with the will and the command of the Creator. This particular hadith, there is tremendous amount of literature, books and books on this one single saying of the Prophet ﷺ. You can go to the translation to this one. This may be very problematic for those who reject any higher order explanation of the so-called natural world, that there is a daily, even instantaneous dependence of every existing thing on the Creator. For Muslims, it's not a problem. I am breathing right now, but my breath is within this system that has its own laws, but it can just cut off. We experienced that recently. Same thing applies to this, to the sun, to the moon. So the principle here is that we teach the unit on the shadows and the sun and the earth, etc., within the concept, number one, of utmost extreme dependence of every living being, every existent being on the Creator, and the division between a living and what we consider not living is also problematic. Because if the sun and the moon and the mountains are non-living beings, they are just objects out there, they wouldn't have the receptivity to the divine command. But the Quran tells us that the mountains would hymn, they will glorify the Creator along with Dawud alayhi salam, one of the prophets. They would hymn. This hadith tells us that the sun and the moon, they are dependent on the will of the Creator, and one day the permission will be denied. So this is where Aristotle's coming into the Muslim Islamic tradition, saying the matter was always there, it will always be there. This was a huge conflict, because if matter is autonomous, the sun and all the objects are autonomous, then there is no controlling Creator. They will go on forever. But that's not the case. That's a fundamental conflict with the Quranic worldview. Because there is an end, there is a beginning, and there is an end. Every existent thing. Me and you and everyone. And every existent thing. So teaching this particular unit from the Quranic worldview would mean reconstructing the conceptual framework. The procedural framework that they provided for the knowledge, that is in direct conflict with the nature-focused aspect of Skinner circle. You know what they are doing? Like I was just so amazed that this would ever pass through anybody's filter. They advertise they are producing a device to do this particular unit. And what do they do? Can we go back to that? Their materials. This is a city person who has never been out in the nature. So their procedures. So what are the materials here?
What you're saying is they should have been using items found in nature? Or
They
things-
should have said, take your children
or
outside to the
sit by a
play.
tree and watch the shadow of the tree go by.
Exactly. This person has never been out of the apartment who wrote this unit. Look at the materials they are using for this
That's
move,
the
this.
better globes.
And it's not difficult for us to say, this is not right. We don't want to have our children have this art. And next thing is, my salah time, my prayer time is on my watch. No, it's not on your watch. It's out there in the sun, in the movement of. And then historical rootedness also means that we have this unit that I am really fascinated by that letter that Jamsheduddin Kashani wrote to his father when he arrived in Samarkand. We made a whole unit of that. Letter is so fascinating. It's written in the 15th century. This man from Kashan, he arrives in Samarkand, and 2 years or whatever time later he writes to his father, telling him what did he find. Early 15th century, the highest level of astronomical research is in Samarkand, in this observatory that Ulugh Beg made. This is historical rootedness, like nature focus is right there, but in that letter is the description of this one hole in the wall that he was asked to make, from which the sun ray would enter this tunnel. We visited that place, we saw that tunnel. Only at the time of Asr prayer, according to Hanafi law. So specific. Now, the Hanafi law, these people were following, there are 4 schools of Sunni laws, as you know. There are slight variations, but they say the time for the afternoon prayer is when the shadow of the object is twice the length of the object. And other schools say no, when the shadow is its own length. There is a difference of opinion. This is where what you were asking, how do we know there are not many Quranic worldviews? So this is an example of being on, everybody says yes, there are 5 prayers in the day, this is the 3rd prayer or whichever way we want to count them. But for this prayer, the time starts at this time and the others say no, it starts at this time. So half an hour difference here and there. But if somebody says no, I don't even believe that there is this prayer, then there is nothing common. If you deny the, but if you say, well, my time hasn't started yet, that's okay. You can pray when your time starts. But the historical rootedness comes from bringing all these things. So nature focus, you just go out. Historical rootedness, what has been done in the Islamic tradition on this unit. And this age is like, everything is now available. You just have to know which is authentic and which is not authentic. Yes.
And that's the tough part.
It's the tough part because so much is unauthentic floating around and it's easier to but again, once you have the principles, when you have genetically modified apple, you taste it, it's genetically modified. There is no taste in it, It's just, so if we could quickly go to the next unit perhaps. I want to have 3 units, science, language arts and social studies.
It's 355.
Yeah,
Is the one you would like?
No, the language arts or whichever, this one, yes. So this is here we have outcomes, right? This, but again, I took a random, like I went through this. There is so much out there, and they have produced so much material for teachers to make it easy. But so what are we doing here? The unit here, experiencing diverse texts. Again, like I am at 1 foot in literature. And there are so many problems in this text. Like I don't know who does this, but diverse text. The term diverse text is not the texts which are diverse. It's the forms in which we are employing those texts. It's the genre that is diverse. We want novels, we want autobiography, we want travelogue, but the same text can be in all of these. So it's a problem with the heading, but we won't go. So the outcome is students will listen, speak, read, write, view, and represent to comprehend and respond personally and critically to oral, print, and other media texts. Respond to text. So these are the outcomes, and the general outcome is number 5, students will listen, speak, etc. See how cut and paste, cut and paste, and cut and paste. Like this is such a low level educationally, if you look at it objectively. Somebody just sat and cut and paste. Same, anyways, this is, but I want to go, please go down. So we have these known in every civilization, in every literature. We have autobiography, biography, historical fiction, and many other forms which they don't even list here. And why would you only have these and not others? How would we deliver the same outcomes from the Quranic worldview? In the Skinner circle, in the context of Skinner circle, Quranic lens also means Islamic civilization, because the unfolding of the Quranic worldview in reality, in human nature, it's not just theoretical discussion. We are dealing with human beings, we are dealing with a civilization, we are dealing with its literature, its art forms, its architecture, its sciences, its languages, its poetry, its all of that. That is the realization, that is the manifestation of the Quranic worldview that happened over the last 1400 years. So historically rootedness means tapping into those resources to deliver this particular outcome. The outcome here is to, number 1, give students the ability to experience these different genres of literature, poetry and fiction and biography, etc. And then be able to provide options for differentiation, consider using strategies such as provide a variety of leveled text and media forms. Go down there. Now, what would a teacher do to deliver this in Skinner Circle as opposed to, say, in Grace Martin or in any other school? What are the foundation of this? I always want to give the example of the ingredients of the actual main dish, not the icing. The actual content of which needs to be used. So optional literature support includes these. A Day in India by Jonathan and Angela Scott. I would like my child to go to India. There is no problem in going to India. I would prefer the child to go to Samarkand. I love that place. There is history, there is something, but India is okay. But I want to go to India, and I want my child to go to India, and I think parents would want their children to go to India as Muslims with the Quranic lens. See what they want to see. And this saying that when you are in Rome, do as Romans do, you see the problem in that. You see the haughtiness in that, the arrogance in that. This phrase came when the Roman civilization was the highest level of civilization, and they wanted everyone to come there and do as they do. We obviously don't accept that anymore, but that is the reality. So we have Al-Biruni. He went to India. This is a 11th century work. Al-Biruni is one of the giants of this civilization. He was a scientist. He's the one I mentioned who gave us the concept of specific heat. That if you heat honey and if you heat water, the temperature would be same, but if you put your finger in both, the amount of heat in the pot with honey would be far greater than. So that is his concept. Many other concepts he gave. And I gave the example of thermocouple using that. But he went to India and he wrote a book about India. So for Skinner Circle to be authentic and true to the vision, there is no problem in using these, but why wouldn't we do multitasking? Why wouldn't teachers do multitasking? So we have biography, we have several Yanars. Why don't we use the biography of the Prophet himself or one of the Imams? There is a wonderful biography of Imam Ahmad, one of the 4 Imams of the founding legals. It's such a fascinating account in 2 volumes of a life that has become and has remained a source of inspiration for millions of people, because he lived at a time of when the rulers came up with this idea that since everything is created, the Quran must also be created. So this whole thing I mentioned before about the Greek knowledge coming into one of the things that and these are open source things that part is so good about our civilization. There is nothing hidden, there is nothing under the carpet. They said, so what about the Quran? Was it created in time or has it always existed? If it has always existed, that means there was God and there was Quran. There are 2 eternals. And if it was created at a certain time, that means God changed his mind. Like why would he create Quran at a certain time and not before and after that? So they made this binary, apparently. And the rulers were obviously powerful at that time, just as they are now everywhere. Like everywhere, even here. I was so disturbed by this new social studies curriculum that this government made. Like they are telling us what our children should learn, where they should go in their social studies. Like who gives them the authority? We voted them in to manage the affairs, not to tell us what our children should learn. That's it. But anyways, that the rulers, what did they say? Quran was created. And they said we are going to enforce this concept on the entire population. Imam Ahmad stood up, like many other scholars, they said, this is not your affair. You are political rulers. This is a question of religion and theology. What business do you have to determine these things in the first place? Number 2, if you say that you are going to enforce this policy that Quran was created, that changes the entirety of the belief system as well. The Quran itself tells us this is the speech of God. Speech of God, speech is an attribute, it's a divine attribute that is inherent in the divinity itself. So you are separating the attribute from the being. This is all Aristotle all over. 1, 2, and now we need to make a relationship between the 2. So, but the point I'm making here is, why do we have to use these, or why teachers have to use these, when these are even more readily available? We have hundreds of books in all these genres. By using those books, we would, number 1, historically root these children. They would know these stories. They would know the names of these people. They would develop some kind of association, psychological, intellectual, emotional, with these people. They will become their models. They will learn about their lives. And we will still deliver the same outcome. The last example I want to give, social studies. So we have three areas. That was science, language arts, and the social studies. The unit on
Language, science,
social studies. This is, yeah. I think this is, no. We were here. Is it combined in one file? Where we go to Athens? That
Must be here. First one.
yeah. I think it was probably combined in the first one. If we go down, in social studies there is a unit going to Athens.
Okay, we did this,
We already did
this,
this.
and then is there one more?
so I think this was caught, so this is the very first file,
Okay,
But there are 4 files? We have 4 files.
4 files,
Yes.
it's just,
Maybe
It
at the
has to be
bottom
in
of
here.
it. No.
let's try the next one.
2 files were combined in one. So this is the unit on science.
Yeah. This is the last file here.
Okay.
There's
The Athens part.
No.
No. Okay, I can just mention that because this is just one more example from social studies. When we study social studies and we apply these principles, when we apply Qur'anic worldview. The Qur'anic worldview is that all human history, from the beginning to the end, is a response to the divine invitation to live, yes, this is very good, to live according to a certain worldview. Each one of us, we have the freedom to say, no, I don't want to listen to this guidance, but this is what the Quranic worldview is. This is a complete system in which the social study part, which is also connected with the history part, is how social units interact with each other in a given society. What are the sources of that study? What is the definition of social studies? And what is its relationship with other branches of knowledge? The example I had was of Athens. Now, Rome, Athens, and Medina, this is a triangle, and whether we acknowledge it or not, these are competing worldviews. These worldviews are not harmonious with each other, and in our history of Western civilization, it's very fascinating that Western civilization was actually based on an Eastern concept of life. If we take the Western civilization post Christianity, because the Bible, the new the prophet upon whom this civilization emerged is not a Western person. His lineage, his whole spiritual basis is somewhere else. And it is the internal cleavage through the 17th century Renaissance or earlier Renaissance, even 17th century is much later, but 17th century really produced that break with its own spiritual tradition, where the kingdom of God was substituted by kingdom of man. Humanism, man became the standard of everything, and we are just down the road from the same place. If this program is true to the Quranic worldview, it would have this framework, historical framework of how we now in 21st century, in this place, are the outcome of all these historical forces that have come through. So I do want to go to Athens again, but with the Quranic lens. It's not that we want to close this program and have a crucible. No, that's not the goal. The goal is to look at the world, give the children the capacity, the ability, the framework, the conceptual knowledge, the tools, the means, the resources with which they can start looking at the world as social studies, chemistry, physics, everything from this lens. And even if these are very small openings, this age is so important. This is the time when seeds are planted. And we are not talking about big trees yet, but we are just planting about these little saplings. And if they go out after 7 years and they are still the same, then this is a great failure. And if they go out and they say, that man you talked about in my literature class, the biography of Imam Ahmad, like when they came with the lashes and they said, we'll imprison you, and if you don't say the Quran was created, we'll give you 50 lashes. And he said, give me 50 lashes. And then they said, okay, the caliph says, here is a sack of gold for you. You know this balcony? There are hundreds and hundreds of people under your apartment, under your building. Just go to the balcony, I'll ask you, was the Quran created? You don't even speak, you just say like this. And this old man who had been imprisoned and lashed and all things, he says, if I did that, I would misguide those hundreds of thousands of people, and how would I stand in front of my Lord? So if these children go out with these stories, they are not just stories, they are real life accounts. Same thing like the life in Medina, this is an open source life. We have eyewitness accounts of what happened in those 23 years. So that's all.
That's all.
We can stop.